question. During my year as a gypsy, how did I know how to get it off the ground? How did I know how to find places? I didn't really. And talk about, again, another failure was initially I thought, I'm going to apply to artist colonies and all these great places like Yaddo and Ragdale, and I'll spend a whole year piecing together this life going from artist colony or writers retreats from one to another. Because years ago I had done this wonderful writers retreat. Ooh, that's hard to say fast. Writers retreat on Whidbey Island out near Seattle, and I had loved it. And I thought, I applied for that one and got in like that. I didn't get into a single one that I applied for, and this is after I have 3 books and a 4th on the way. So you never know what's going to happen. I got some very nice messages that I was overqualified for some, but some I wasn't. I just didn't get in, and that happens, And so I'm like, okay, that was my plan A. And I remember talking to my agent one day and telling her, I didn't get into this one either. She's like, you don't need those. You just start your own. Make up your own residencies. You should start with an autumn in New England. I'm like, well, that's a great idea, but I don't know how. She goes, no, I'm telling you, start with an autumn in New England. I'm offering you a house. And I was like, oh, okay. She's like, it's my weekend house. I don't get up there very often. I love it, and it makes me so sad that it sits empty. Now, my friends had always teased me, always about, what's the plan, Katrina? Because I'm always like I know the plan. I always know exactly what's going to happen, and then we'll do this, and then this happens. And then after the divorce, it was like, the plan fell apart. And it became very important to me to learn to be a little more spontaneous and to just kind of go with it. So when I accepted her invitation, and I'm like, I was going to come up in September after a friend's wedding, I didn't know what was after that. And that was a big deal. My friends thought, and my friends knew, for me especially, the planner, I'm like, well, where do you go after Connecticut? I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure it out, And then it was just on one of those trips to New York City that this other thing came up. Now, I have really dear friends in Portugal who used to live in Dayton and now live in Portugal. He works for NATO. She is supposed to be retired, but has started a theater company there. And they were like, come over, stay with us. You can stay here as long as you want. So it wouldn't be an empty house, but they both work during the day. And I'd been over there several times to see them since they'd moved. I knew that they really did work all day, that I would actually be able to write there. So I had already bought a ticket to go there in January after the Connecticut thing ended. And I was meeting with Danielle, the former student, and someone asked her about the dog. And I was like, well, when do you need someone? And she said, January through April. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. That's when I'm in Portugal. And then I was like, wait a second. That Portugal invitation is wide open. So it was kind of like, so again, I ended up changing that ticket 3 times, the Portugal ticket 3 times, because then it was like that. I thought that was the next step, but it wasn't always. And that was really good for me to learn to just kind of, all right, this works. New York City is fun in any season. Portugal's a lot more fun when it's warm. So. Yes?
You had talked about being preachy, and that you wanted people just to start thinking about it now. But did you infuse your values into any of your characters, and then in order to avoid being preachy, do you give other characters opposite values, or how did you?
Yeah, I should actually give the mic to people when they ask the questions. She talked about, how I said I was very preachy, and the editor talks about soapbox. That do I infuse my own values into any particular character, and then to not be preachy, do I try to include opposing points of view? I think I do that. That's always the goal. It's up to a reader to know if I pull that off or not. But for instance, in Blessings of the Animals, that's where the idea of those other voices chapters came from. It's mostly Cammie's story in first person, but every 5th or 6th chapter, some other character in third person gets their say, and they only get their say once. They're characters through the whole story. And a lot of that was me stirring the pot of wanting to just, well, let's look at every single kind of relationship. How can you? There's a million different kinds of relationships. But let's look at a bunch of different kinds of relationships. And I wanted each of those characters to present some other view of marriage than what Cammie held. And a lot of times Cammie doesn't even know what they know. And that's why I had to go to letting the other characters have the talk. Like Olive, I know a few of you have read it, where, she's like, I hate this guy, I'm not gonna accept, I'm tired of this. If he asked me to marry him right now, I wouldn't. And then the next time we hear from Olive, they're engaged. Because she just wants to be married, it doesn't matter to who. But Cammie, think about that, Cammie never knows that through the whole novel, that Olive had that thought. She just thinks, oh, this is great, they're finally getting married. So I try to, very much I try to have the different characters present different views. Yes.
What prompted Kindness of Strangers, and are the statistics in it based on fact?
Yes. Could you hear that question? That was good. That was excellent theater voice. What prompted it is kind of a long story. Are we okay on time? Are we good on time? Okay. But first of all, the short part is those statistics are true. And when I first encountered them, I thought they had to be typos. But they come from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and from the Department of Justice. And they're still accurate now. I'll get to those statistics in a second. But this is the book that deals with a case of child abuse. The years that I freelanced, I did a lot of theater workshops where I'd go to many different schools. And I was in a pretty affluent school. I was only going to be there for a week, working with 5th, 6th, and 7th graders doing theater improv. And I had told them, 5th graders are horrible at improv. And they were like, it's okay, we don't care. And I was only going to be there for a week, working with each grade an hour a day, and on Friday we would do like this little improv presentation. So I go into this 5th grade class, and this was in 1996. And there was this kid, this cute little blonde kid, who has a t-shirt on that says, "The truth is out there." Were any of you X-Files fans? I loved the X-Files, and so I commented on his t-shirt, and I was in with him like that because I knew what it meant. It was the slogan of the show. Well, he was so funny, and 5th grader, improv is hard for 5th graders. And he was really good at it, really funny, really smart. I loved him. You're not supposed to have favorites, but you always do. And because I was going to be there such a short time, I had given each kid a little index card and said, tell me 3 things you think are interesting about you or you want me to know. And this would be my cheat sheet if I got some really shy kid who I couldn't get to participate, and I found out, oh, she loves horses. I'll come up with something that has to do with horses, and I'll pull her in. So I'm sitting at lunch, and I'm flipping through the cards, and I can't wait to see what he's written, because he was so funny. And his first thing says, I have HIV. Now, remember, I had worked at an AIDS foundation for quite a long time. I knew my AIDS facts. And remember, this was 1996 or 5, something like that. This is no longer true, fortunately, but in 95, there's no way he was born with it. He would never have lived to be that healthy 10-year-old I was just playing theater games with. That's no longer true, which is great. In 95, we're also past the Ryan White scare, so he didn't get it from a blood transfusion, which leaves us with traditional means of exposure, and he's 10 years old. So my first thought is, please don't let this be true. I had taught a ballet class once where a little girl told me she had leukemia, and I believed her. And I said something to her parents once, and they were like, no, she doesn't. So I'm like, please let it be something like that, where he saw some after school special, he doesn't really understand what he's saying. So I showed it to the teacher first, and she was like, no, it is true. And she was actually really thrilled he'd written it, which I didn't understand at the time. All she told me was that he'd been sexually abused, his parents were incarcerated, and he was with a foster family. So that's all she told. That's all she could tell me. But she must have said something to the foster mom, because that woman sought me out at the end of the day and told me more. And I've told this story now hundreds of times, and it still gives me goosebumps. But you know how every school has those rooms that are like cafeteria, auditorium, gymnasium, all in one? So I'm sitting on the edge of a stage, and I'm watching him at the other end of the room play basketball with these foster siblings while I talk to his foster mom. He's playing, they're arguing, they're laughing, right? So I can see him in action while she tells me this story. His parents were both doctors, were very well respected in their communities. They had very serious cocaine addictions that nobody knew about. He was their only child. When they had been systematically selling off everything in their house. They had one of those giant mansions, and when this was discovered, it was empty. I mean, for a whole year, all 3 of them had been sleeping on the floor because they didn't have beds. And when they ran out of material things to sell, they were essentially prostituting their only child to the dealer and his friends. So neither of his parents had HIV, but he did. So they were incarcerated, and this family was attempting to adopt him, and they had known him all his life. They had known the parents, and had no idea that this was happening. That story leveled me, completely leveled me, because I'm watching him as she tells me the story, and I'm thinking, if someone had told me that story before I came to the school, I would have guessed wrongly that I could pick that kid out. And I'm telling you, this boy would be the last kid I picked. And so right away, I knew I wanted to write about it in some way, but not in any kind of gross, exploitative way. I don't think you're interested in reading about horrible things happening to children. I'm not interested in writing that. but the word that occurred to me immediately was resilience. Because I'm watching him laugh with these siblings and play basketball. And I'm like, he didn't just survive this hideous thing, he was thriving. He was with this family that loved him, and he was happy. I watched him in class, you know. He was this amazing kid, and I'm like, how do you do that? I mean, it's so cliche. You can never say things like this in a novel, but it's like, that's the triumph of the human spirit right there, right? You can never write a line like that. That sounds so corny, but you know what I mean. I'm like, that's what I wanted to try to capture. Where I'd already written a book that dealt with AIDS, I'd already written a book that dealt with addiction. So, and his story's not my story to tell. I only knew that kid for 5 hours. But that's where, like, everything, you use everything. I only knew him for 5 hours, but he had a profound impact on me. And he started me doing this research where I thought his story was very unique and rare. The minute I did the most rudimentary research, I found out it wasn't rare at all. This happens all the time, and the statistics are unbelievable. So the statistics that she was referring to that are mentioned in Kindness, they say, and like I said, this comes from the Department of Justice and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, so this is no, like, you know, fluff site or something. 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls will experience some kind of sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. Now, when we say some kind, there's a huge spectrum. Not all of it is as horrifying as what this kid went through, but they're all horrifying on some level, and every kind has an impact on the person. So that's what started me wanting to write that book. And that book required more research than any other, because I felt if I was going to head into a topic like that, I had to get it right, I had to do it responsibly. And just so you know, there are no scenes of abuse actually happening. I don't want to write that. The book starts with the discovery, and so there is no more abuse once the book starts, because it's discovered and stopped. It's really the story of the healing and the fallout and what happens from that point. All my answers won't be that long, I promise. Yes? Yes.
Can you tell us what your writing routine is like? How many hours a day? How many days a week? You know, if you break it up during the day?
Could you all hear? Anybody want that repeated? Okay. She asked about my writing routine. How many days a week? How many hours a day? How do I break it up? When I left teaching, there was a serious fear factor of, like, I cannot waste time, and I have to be really, really disciplined. And that's where, like, I go back when I said the thing about my poor parents, and all the things they supported me in, but it all turned out, again, that's all part of the plan, because I really credit my years of ballet as giving me serious discipline. That's what I got. So those years were not wasted at all, even though I never was the ballerina. But I think I'm very, very disciplined. And again, like I said, I left a salary, so it was like, I better produce. I can't just take my summer off like I normally would. So I kept, since I've been a teacher for so long, I kept the school schedule as sort of my schedule. I used to have to be at work at 8 o'clock. Now I'm usually working before 8, but I get up, I'm an early morning person. But by 8 o'clock means done with Facebook, done with email, you're seriously working. You're done with the crossword, all that stuff. And so my school day was 8 to 4:30, and I kind of keep that. But I work every weekday, unless, like, this is writing related. So I didn't write today, but this is still a writing activity, so it counts. And this is the fun part. This is the really, really fun part. But I can't write brand new, like, create story from 8 to 4:30. I just can't do it. And I don't know any writer who can. I usually have 3, maybe 4 hours on a really good day that I can use for, like, if I'm on a first draft. And then I take a break and eat something, and then there's always business-related stuff, answering emails, promotional stuff, research, editing, there's guest blogging, there's all these things that I used to not be able to take advantage of when I was teaching, that now I can. And if I'm in a different position, like now I'm going through revisions on this young adult novel, I can do that for many more hours than I can write a first draft. When you're actually creating the story, it takes a very different kind of energy than revising it does. I can revise all day, and I love it. It's like taking things apart. I love every minute of it. It feels so much safer than trying to create the story in the first place. But every day my friends have learned not to call and invite me to the pool, because I won't come, I'm working, They're like, yeah, but your boss must be horrible. She's okay. But I actually plan the personal days and vacation just like a family. I tell myself, you can have this many weeks, you can have this many days. And the thing is, I've learned life interferes, but we have to learn when to know when it's really interfering and when we're just letting it. And so you have to be really ruthless about the writing time. Now, obviously, I'm able to do that now. When I was teaching, and this is what I said about you have to be in love with it. After the divorce, I moved to be 4 minutes away from the school where I taught so that I could get up and write from 5 to 7 every morning and then still be at work at 8 o'clock. Those morning hours are my best hours, and that's not a lot of time because I get up at 5. It's not like I'm actually writing from 5 to 7. You wake up, you have to turn on the coffee and wash your face and all that stuff. It's not like you immediately spring to the desk. But it was enough time to keep my pulse on a project and keep some momentum going. And again, you have to love it that much when people are like, but I just can't find time. I never want to sound like I'm being a meanie, but I'm like, if you really want to write, you will find the time. You will carve it out somewhere. And if you can't, maybe you don't really want to be a writer. Because it's one of those things that you do because you can't help it. You would do it whether you ever got published, and you can't help yourself. It's like an addiction. Believe me, I know. Yes?
Do you work on several manuscripts or drafts at the same time?
The question is, do I work on several manuscripts or drafts at the same time? I didn't used to, but I have started doing that now, and I kind of like it. So far, the timing has been just right. So, for instance, this past month has been a little strange, where Reasons to Be Happy, which comes out in October, but it's going to be in galley form at the Book Expo in New York City in May. So we had to go through the copy edit very quickly of that. So turning it into a galley where you have to like check every single page and initial that this is your last chance to make any changes. So it's always really nerve-wracking, especially the acknowledgments page. So I was checking that, which I can only do for a few hours because you have to be really, really fresh and you don't want to miss anything. So you can't get to the point where you're like, yeah, whatever. It's like, no, you have to care. As soon as you're thinking whatever, put it away, come back to it. So I was doing that kind of really close copy editing. At the same time, I was revising Strange Katie, which is the young adult novel that I hope to have done in my agent's hand by the end of the month. I was also doing a rewrite on a play that I'm collaborating with some friends. And then I was taking notes based on some research on the next adult novel. The notes, that's the easy part. So the next adult book deals with homelessness, and I've been volunteering with Fair Housing in Dayton, and so I'd come home from doing some hours with them and take notes. So there's all these things at different stages, and they all take very different energies. So when I'm fried on one thing, there's always something else I could turn to. And occasionally, deadlines will butt up against each other, and you have to put everything away but one thing. But I've been pretty lucky where so far the timing has worked out that it's not too crazy. Yes?
Do you think you'll ever write nonfiction, like Julia Cameron or Anne Lamott?
Ooh, the question is, do I think I'll ever write nonfiction like Julia Cameron or Anne Lamott? Nonfiction makes so much more money than fiction. I don't know. I would say, I don't know. That's a terrible answer, but I honestly can't say. Right now, I have never had a story idea for something nonfiction that made me as excited as the fiction ideas. So maybe someday, I'm not shutting that door entirely, but so far I've never had that. But maybe someday one would pull on me. Who knows? Anybody else? Is that it? Do you think? Last call. Oh wait, there is one more. See, you just have to be patient.
Who of your contemporary writers are you particularly enamored with?
Which of contemporary writers am I particularly enamored with? The top answer is always Barbara Kingsolver. I reread her often. I love her fiction and her nonfiction, although I like her fiction even more. I don't know if you've read her latest, The Lacuna. I thought it was wonderful. I learned something from her. When I teach writing classes, I almost always use passages from her novels to show things and be like, look at how this unfolds, look at how she does this. So she's one that I reread a lot and wish that she turned them out faster. And then there's always, there's so many, but she's always at the top of the list. And I really should make a list because whenever I get asked that, I always draw a blank. I read all the time, but then it's like, and as I'm driving home tonight, I'll think of, oh, I should have said this and this and this. But I do have a blog, and a website. And on the website, I frequently will post what I'm reading and what I like. So there's a full list there if you want to go and check that out. My memory, and it has nothing to do with the concussion from the horse, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much, you all. This was a wonderful, wonderful